Hello, CVCS. Welcome back to the Chapel Podcast. My name is Anastasia Davi. I'm the Community Life Prefect on campus. And today we are joined with Derick Zeulner as our speaker. He's one of the pastors at South Shores, and today he will be talking to us about shame. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So it's that moment when you realize your zipper's been down for at least a good half the day. Or it's tripping and falling in front of the girl that you like. Or maybe it's the moment when you're with your friends, but your dad, trying to impress them, is using terms like bussin' and no cap and riz. Or maybe it's for you. Thank you, I'm still here. It's not making the team that you thought you'd make, or not getting the part in the play that you wanted. Or maybe it's not getting to the college you wanted, but it seems like everybody else did. Or maybe it's even getting dumped and everybody just knows about it. We have seasons, moments, times of embarrassment, humiliation, shame. And that's not just part of high school, it's part of the human experience. There was an author I was reading this past week. He tells the story of an experience where he was out backpacking, solo backpacking. He's out on the trails when nature calls, not number one. So he's got to go way off the trail to do it discreet, to do it in a proper manner, also to find an area private enough to let his guard down. When all of a sudden, another hiker appears through the brush. So here he is, locking eyes, every fiber in his body going on high alert, his face going red, and though the hiker quickly disappears, he's left to process all the feelings. Now, thankfully, he's a philosopher, so he describes his emotions with precision. We have it on the screen here. Though I had done nothing wrong, I felt wrongly situated in the world. I felt as though my very presence was a source of pain, discomfort, and embarrassment, both for this other person and for me. I felt a significant downtick in my social standing in the world, like I was a less respectable person than I had been just moments before. I felt like a person of slightly lesser consequence. I wanted to shrink, to disappear. And so maybe you understand some of those feelings. And what it is these are the feelings of what shame is. Some of the words he used on another slide. We have feeling wrongly situated in the world. That moment you feel like you just don't belong. A sense of diminished social standing. You've lost significance that you had before. Or experiencing yourself as a source of pain, of discomfort, embarrassment to yourself and to others. And all of that leads to a desire to want to hide, to disappear. Now, it might be from an accident like this scenario of him backpacking, or it's slipping and falling in the gym, or maybe it's something you're born with, a disability, a speech impediment. Maybe it's a wrong that's been done to you. You're actually the victim in the scenario, but it still brings shame. And of course, shame often comes from the wrongs that we do, our actions, which are connected to guilt. But while guilt is related to doing wrong, shame is about how others see you, how they treat you, how they feel about you, and in turn, how you feel about knowing how they see you. But shame isn't all bad. There's certain kinds of shame that can serve a purpose, kind of like pain can serve a purpose. If you were to just leave your hand on a hot stove and not feel pain, you'd end up losing your hand. But because you feel that pain, you reach away. Shame can serve a purpose too. It can be a social deterrent to keep us from doing wrong. But like pain, shame is not supposed to be a permanent state. It's not supposed to be something you're always in. But a lot of times, that's what life looks like. Maybe for some of you, you end up living with shame. Living with disgrace. Might be from some bad choices you made, maybe get involved with the wrong crowd, or some action that you regret, or some habit you've tried to keep secret. Maybe it's a sort of a failure of yours, a dream you couldn't achieve, or maybe it's something that's been done to you. Maybe your parents, some bully, some authority figure. Whatever it is, something that feels like it has lowered the way that others see you, or just how you feel they would see you if only they really knew the truth. And so while we often talk about Jesus, and you even just sang about how he can take away our guilt, can do something about our sin, we wonder sometimes, is there a cure for the way that I feel, for this shame? Did Jesus have a plan for that? And that's the question. How can we get rid of our shame? So to answer this question with you in this short time that we have, I want to take us to the Gospel of Mark. And we're going to look at chapter 15 to look at Jesus at the cross. And one of the things I want you to notice about Mark's gospel and his account of Jesus at the cross is he's not going to focus or emphasize the physical pain, even though there's a lot of it. The scourging, the crucifixion itself. But Mark's not focused on the nails on the cross so much, but on the mocking, the reviling, and the shame. And so after beating Jesus within inches of his life, the soldiers are going to humiliate our king through a mock coronation. This is Mark 15, starting verse 16. It says, "And the soldiers led him away inside the palace," that is the governor's headquarters. "And they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him." So what are they doing? They're imitating the actions of someone being crowned king. But this is a coronation of shame. It's a parody of power. Now, there's a cloak, a crown, they're saluting, they're hailing as king, they're kneeling before him, but all of it's in jest, all of it's mockery. Plus they're hitting him, spitting on him, and ripping the cloak back off. Well, if Jesus is supposed to be a king, he was a joke king, he was a weak king, he's this pathetic display of a man claiming to be king. And I think all of that makes Jesus feel wrongly situated in the world, a sense of diminished social standing, that he is experiencing himself as an embarrassment to himself and to others, which would lead to a desire to shrink, to hide, to disappear. As Jesus' purpose and identity is utterly abused, I think Jesus feels shame. But we're not finished yet. It's going to get worse. It gets more public. The next verse is, "And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh. But he didn't take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take." So here are more actions that are added to Jesus' shame, starting with public weakness. The soldiers have to ask, or really they compel someone else to carry this crossbeam for Jesus. He's been so weakened by what he's physically gone through that he can't carry it himself. And this is the guy who told his disciples, "Hey, you have to carry your own cross." He can't do it. And then we add public nakedness. They strip him of his clothes and they lift him on the cross fully naked. I mean, that's personal, that's private, that's not intended for everyone's view. It adds to Jesus feeling wrongly situated, his social status diminished because, well, this is not what you do to kings. It's not appropriate for who he is. But then, if you caught it, Jesus is offered a way out. Someone offers Jesus wine mixed with myrrh. It's given to dull the pain, to numb his experience. Like many today who turn to drugs or alcohol to numb or escape their shame, Jesus has this chance to hide, at least mentally, but he doesn't take it. You see, to say that Jesus feels very real shame isn't to say that he responds to it in the same way that you and I would. He chooses to feel all that is poured out on him, the pain and the shame. That's why in Hebrews 12:2 it says that he endured the cross despising the shame. He handles it differently. Jesus won't escape. Another detail to notice is in verse 24. It says the soldiers divide his clothes, and then they cast lots. They roll dice for it, essentially. This is a clear example of prophecy fulfilled from Psalm 22, written by King David 1,000 years before. David writes, "They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." That feels kind of like a random reference. Why would Mark make sure to include it? Well, it's a signal from him to the reader to remember that God's hand is involved. What's going on right here that we're witnessing, is a divine arrangement. Ultimately, Jesus is not in the soldiers' hands. He's not in the crowd's hands or in Pilate's or the leaders. It's happening according to God's plan, which is good, but it doesn't make it any easier. And next, Jesus goes up on the cross itself, and the shaming only increases. Here's our last section here. It says, "And it was the third hour when they crucified him, and the inscription of the charge against him read, 'The King of the Jews.' And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right hand and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, 'Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross.' So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, 'He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe.' And those who were crucified with him also reviled him." Crucifixion is a shameful way to die. It's on a public road. It's just outside the city. And really, it was more than death. It was more than torture. It was a public sign to anyone who would walk by. This is what you get when you mess with Rome. We're the ones in charge, and this person, he's worth no more than a slave. It's a slave's death. He's mocked by the people passing by. He's mocked by the official inscription above him. He's mocked by the chief priests and scribes. Even the guys who are dying the same death on either side, they mock him too. And they ridicule his claims about the temple, though they didn't understand it. They mock his actions as a savior of others. They mock his identity as a king. And they mock his purpose to help others see and believe. But I think probably the worst words that they call out are those for him to save himself. Get down from the cross if you can. Put an end to all this. He saved others, but he can't save himself. That should cause us to ask that question. Well, what others? And what did he save them from? Well, if you've been reading through Mark at all, then you would have clear examples to look back on. Different sicknesses, ailments that people have. Jesus heals them. He saves them. But it's always more than just the healing. In Mark chapter 2, there's a paralyzed man, and Jesus heals him to show that Jesus has the power to forgive sins. But there's even more still. He saves him from that shame of having to be carried by his friends around anywhere he wants to go, a life enslaved to a mat, begging on the side of the road. A few chapters later, in chapter 5, there's a demon-possessed man who is living naked among the tombs. Well, Jesus not only gives him his right mind and his life back, but he gives him dignity, a chance where he could be part of a community of people once again. In that same chapter, there's a woman who's had a bleeding issue for 12 years. She is, to no fault of her own, she's ostracized and left out of the community. She's unclean. And Jesus not only heals her, but he restores her social status. Well, these are shame and honor issues. And there's more. There's this foreign daughter. There's the deaf man, the blind man, the son who falls in fire pits. And in every case, whether the problem was because of something they did or things done to them or things born with or accidents, they all carried shame for how they were understood in the world. Each one of them had a diminished social standing. They were embarrassments and they were in pain for themselves and others. But rather than let them hide or disappear, Jesus embraces them in their shame and he restores them. He restores their health. He restores them through forgiveness. He restores their honor. But all of this depended on Jesus not getting down from the cross. Jesus takes care of our shame if he doesn't escape his. Now, he could have saved himself. He could have gotten down, but we would have been left with our guilt and our shame. You see, the people attacking him from below, they got it wrong. They said, well, he saved others. He can't save himself. No, Jesus saved others because he didn't save himself. And now Jesus becomes the location, the person, the embrace where healing for shame is found. And here's the big idea. The one thing I hope you to walk away from here with is Jesus suffered to save us from our shame. He suffered to save us from our shame. Through faith in Jesus, your guilt before God can be traded for innocence and your shame replaced with honor. The problem is too often our desire is, and our tendency is to hide, to disappear. And that hiding is how we keep from finding healing. We hide in getting our schoolwork all done and making sure our grades are good. And we can hide in our athletics and achievements and our friend groups and our fashions. We can hide in our Netflix and our video games and in our bands and movies and vibes and attitudes and humor. We hide. We're really good at it. But instead of hiding, we need to be seen. We need to be known. We need to be embraced to be free of our felt loss of this reputation and honor and social standing. Friends, Jesus was intentionally wrongly situated in the world so that you could know he sees and knows your shame. He's ready to embrace you right where you are. Now, it's always kind of weird and hard to know how exactly this plays out this side of heaven. But I heard a story last week about a woman in Venezuela that I think really shows this well. Her name is Selene. She had a child outside of marriage, a little boy named Samuel, and he was born with no hands and no feet. Now, they were outcasts because of her unmarried pregnancy. They were outcasts because of his defects, and they had no community. They had no people, only shame. But God brought a church planter, an evangelist named Antonio, into their lives. And Antonio not only loves Jesus, but he also happens to be blind. He was kind of uniquely situated to reach out to them, to bring the gospel of Jesus' forgiveness into their lives, but also then to bring them into community within the church to restore their social honor. Now, for you this morning, kind of hard to see you, but most of you seem to have hands and feet. Maybe you're not ostracized from a whole community, but I know you have your own shame. You have your own feeling of being wrongly situated in the world at times. You're in high school. You're preoccupied with social standing and always a little worried you don't measure up. And if for some reason you haven't felt failure yet, you will. But here's the good news. You can let Jesus embrace you in your shame, and you can stop hiding. Because Jesus is the willing sufferer who trades all that's not right with us, including our guilt and our shame, so that we can be made new. At the cross, Jesus bears all the costs. Jesus suffered to save us from our shame. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would meet each person here in this room. Lord, that they would have let down their guard enough to be honest with themselves of what they're feeling and holding on to and the hiding that they're doing. And in its place, Lord, they would see the open arms of Christ, all that he did for them, and they would entrust themselves to his love and honor. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for that message. I'm now joined with Derick Zeulner in the podcast studio for a short interview. So my first question is, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been at South Shores Church for about 20 years now, since I was a junior in college at Biola University, and have married, and I have 4 kids. And the oldest is just about, he's still a couple years out of high school, but he just became a teenager this year.
Wow, thank you. What do you hope students take away from your message today?
I think embarrassment and shame and humiliation is something always on the mind of teens, and yet rarely wanting to acknowledge it, because even that is embarrassing to think that we might struggle with those, but it really is a human thing. I mean, I just shared a similar message at my church a couple of weeks ago, and man, people are responding because it's something that often will carry their whole lives, and Jesus offers full freedom in what he did for us.
Yeah, I think that message was super powerful and really relevant, and there's just so much comfort and relief knowing that we have a companion who wants to meet us in that shame and help us be restored and set free from that. So thank you so much. And then if anyone would like to get more connected with you, how could they do so?
Yeah, you can head over to southshores.org. You'll find my email as well as other pastors from our church there. We're also on Instagram, South Shores Church. And yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. Capistrano Valley Christian Schools is a Christian JK-12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Be sure to check out, subscribe to, and leave a review of this show and the other shows on our network on your podcast player of choice. Doing so supports the school community in a multitude of ways. For more information about the CVCS Podcast Network or any of our other shows, check out cvcs.org or email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the whole network, this is Mr. Jasper saying thank you again for listening, and stay tuned for more.